Imagine a marathon. Usually when we think of the Olympics, we think of peak human performance. We think of athletes who have trained for years, drinking electrolytes, wearing high-tech shoes, and pushing the boundaries of what the human body can do. Now, I want you to erase that image from your mind completely. I want you to picture a race where the man in first place crossed the finish line in a car. The man in second place was carried across the line while hallucinating on rat poison. The man in fourth place was a Cuban postman who ran in dress shoes and stopped to take a nap halfway through. And two other runners were literally chased off the track by a pack of wild dogs. This wasn't a sketch from a comedy show. This was the 1904 St. Louis Olympic Marathon. It was an event so catastrophic, so poorly organized, and so incredibly dangerous that the Olympic Committee seriously considered banning the marathon event forever. Today, we are going to look at the single most chaotic sporting event in human history, a race that had everything: cheating, near-death experiences, scientific experiments on humans, and rotten apples. Welcome to the 1904 St. Louis Marathon. To understand why this race turned into a survival horror movie, we first need to look at the setting. The year is 1904. The location is St. Louis, Missouri. The city was hosting both the World's Fair and the Olympics at the same time. It was supposed to be a showcase of American greatness. But there was a problem. The organizers didn't care about sports. They cared about spectacle. The marathon was scheduled for the afternoon of August 30th. Now, if you are a runner, you know that you run marathons in the early morning to avoid the heat. But the organizers decided to start the race at 3 p.m. The temperature was over 90 degrees Fahrenheit, 32 degrees Celsius. The humidity was suffocating, but the heat wasn't the worst part. The worst part was a man named James Sullivan. James Sullivan was the chief organizer of the games, and he had some very interesting ideas about sports science. He wanted to use the marathon to test a theory called purposeful dehydration. He believed that drinking water during exercise was a sign of weakness and actually bad for the body. So in a 24.8-mile race under the scorching sun, Sullivan provided exactly one water station. And it wasn't at the start, it wasn't at the halfway point. It was at the 11-mile mark. And the water came from a dirty, rusty well located next to a boiler. This wasn't a race anymore. It was a medical experiment designed to see how long humans could survive without fluids before collapsing. And then there was the track itself. It wasn't a paved road. It was a dirt path used by delivery trucks. The course went up and down 7 massive hills. The path was covered in inches of thick dust. And because the roads weren't closed to traffic, the runners were constantly dodging horses, wagons, and the organizers' cars. These cars kicked up massive clouds of dust, which the runners had to breathe in for 3 hours straight. As we will see later, this dust would nearly kill one of the athletes. 32 men stood at the starting line. But this wasn't an elite lineup of super athletes. It was a bizarre collection of characters that looked like the cast of a sitcom. Let's meet our contestants. First, we have Felix Carvajal. Felix was a postman from Cuba. He had no coach, no sponsor, and no money. To get to the Olympics, he ran around Havana begging for donations. He raised enough cash to buy a boat ticket to New Orleans. But as soon as he landed in America, he found a craps game and gambled away all his money. Broke but determined, Felix walked and hitchhiked nearly 700 miles to St. Louis. He arrived at the starting line just minutes before the gun went off. He was wearing heavy street shoes, a long-sleeve white shirt, and long trousers. He looked like he was dressed for a funeral, not a marathon. Another athlete, feeling sorry for him, grabbed a pair of scissors and cut Felix's trousers at the knees to make improvised shorts. Next, we have Len Tao and John Mashiani. They were Swana tribesmen from South Africa. They weren't even in St. Louis for the Olympics. They were part of a Boer War exhibit at the World's Fair. Someone told them there was a race happening, and they thought, why not? They ran barefoot. They became the first black Africans to compete in the modern Olympics. Len Tao was actually a very fast runner, and he probably would have won a medal. if nature hadn't intervened. And finally, the American favorites, Sam Mellor, Thomas Hicks, and Fred Lors. These were experienced runners. They had trained for this. They thought they were prepared. They were wrong. No one was prepared for the nightmare that was about to begin. The gun fired at 3:03 p.m. The chaos started immediately. The support cars driving ahead of the runners kicked up so much dust that the athletes couldn't see 5 feet in front of them. They were coughing, spitting mud, and choking. William Garcia from California was the first major casualty. He didn't drop out because he was tired. He dropped out because his body was shutting down. He inhaled so much dust that it coated his esophagus and ripped his stomach lining. He collapsed on the side of the road, vomiting blood. If he hadn't been found an hour later, he would have died right there in the dirt. Meanwhile, our Cuban friend Felix Carvajal was running a surprisingly good race. Despite running in dress shoes, he was keeping up with the leaders, but Felix had a problem. He hadn't eaten in 40 hours. He was starving. He saw an orchard along the road and stopped to grab some apples. Perfect fuel, he thought. He was wrong. The apples were rotten. Within minutes, Felix was doubled over with severe stomach cramps. So what does an Olympic athlete do in this situation? Felix found a nice shady spot on the side of the road and took a nap. Yes, in the middle of the Olympic marathon, he went to sleep. While Felix was sleeping, Len Tao, the South African runner, was fighting his own battle. He was running through a residential area when he attracted the attention of a pack of wild dogs. Instead of running toward the finish line, Len Tao had to sprint a mile off course just to escape being bitten. Despite losing nearly 10 minutes fighting off dogs, he still managed to finish 9th, which is honestly the most impressive feat of the day. By the 9-mile mark, Fred Lors, one of the American favorites, was done. He had severe cramping. He decided to quit. He waved down a support car and asked for a ride back to the stadium to pick up his clothes. He hopped in the passenger seat, relaxed, and watched the other runners suffering in the heat as he breezed past them. But then, the car broke down. They were still a few miles from the stadium. Fred, now feeling rested and refreshed after his car ride, thought, "You know what would be funny? If I just ran across the finish line." So, he started jogging. He entered the Olympic Stadium. The crowd saw an American runner and went absolutely wild. They were cheering his name. The band started playing. Alice Roosevelt, the daughter of the President of the United States, came down to the track to place the gold wreath on his head. Fred was just about to accept the medal when someone in the crowd shouted, "Wait a minute, I saw that guy in a Buick." Fred immediately smiled and said, "I was only joking. I wasn't actually going to take the medal." The officials didn't laugh. He was banned for life, although they forgave him a year later. With Fred Lors disqualified, the race for the real gold medal was still happening, and it was a horror show. Thomas Hicks was leading, but barely. 10 miles from the finish, Hicks begged his trainers for water. Remembering James Sullivan's no water experiment, his trainers refused. Instead, they decided to give him a performance booster. In 1904, they didn't have Gatorade. They had strychnine. Strychnine is rat poison. It is a deadly toxin, but in very small doses, it acts as a stimulant for the nervous system. His trainers mixed the rat poison with egg whites and fed it to him. Hicks turned pale. He kept running, but he was fading fast. So his trainers did the logical thing. They gave him more rat poison. And to wash it down, a shot of brandy. Yes, alcohol and poison. The breakfast of champions. By the last mile, Thomas Hicks was hallucinating. He believed the finish line was still 20 miles away. He was begging for food. His legs were completely dead. He was physically unable to lift his feet. His two trainers grabbed him by the arms and essentially dragged him down the track. His feet were shuffling through the dirt. His head was hanging down, and he was delirious. He crossed the finish line and collapsed immediately. Doctors rushed to his side. If he had taken one more dose of strychnine, he would have died right there on the track. He had lost 8 pounds during the race. He was declared the winner, but he was too weak to even stand up to receive his trophy. He had to be carried off on a stretcher. Out of the 32 men who started the race, only 14 finished. It remains the lowest finishing rate in Olympic history. The race was such a disaster that James Sullivan, the man who designed this torture chamber, stated that the marathon was indefensible and suggested it be removed from the Olympics permanently. Thankfully, they didn't ban the marathon. They just decided to, give people water next time. The 1904 St. Louis Marathon stands as a monument to human stupidity, bad science, and incredible endurance. It gave us a cheater in a car, a napping postman, a poisoning victim as a winner, and a legacy that will never be forgotten. So, the next time you feel tired during a workout, just remember, at least you aren't being chased by wild dogs while hallucinating on rat poison in the middle of Missouri. Thanks for watching.